Ah, hello there. I didn't see you guys sitting there. Welcome back to the workshop. This week, we've got a little change of pace. We always love building big projects, but sometimes it's nice to have a quick little win. So, this week, I'll show you guys how I took this tank and built an exact replica. Because this one's a little rusty. So there's the tank all finished off, and we'll take you back in time and show you how we made it. The tank has corroded through along the bottom, and obviously it's got a big hole cut into it. Now, I'm assuming the hole was cut in there to inspect the interior after they found it corroded, and since then it's taken a good knock on the corner there. Now, before we can go ahead and replicate the tank, we're going to have to do a little bit of panel beating, get it back to something we can take a good template off of, and then we'll go ahead and start taking our templates, bending up the panels, and then rolling the beads in. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and play around and see exactly what moves this tank best. I'll try some rubber mallets on the leather bag, on the wood, see what just moves it around the easiest. I'm not 100% sure on what it's made from. I'm fairly sure it's like a 1000 series. It seems fairly soft, and it's definitely a 1.5 mil tank. So let's get to it. So now that we've got the tank back to the right shape, now we can start actually making some templates, and we're just going to use some paper, lay it over, masking tape it down, generally make lines for where our beads are going to run, where the edges of our panels are going to be, the borders, all that kind of stuff. So even the filler neck is just actually a piece of flat sheet metal bent around, welded together along there, and then welded into the tank. And he's also just run a little bead for a recess for the filler neck. So this is super cool. We're going to do our best to replicate all of this. Alright, so I'm done with the template for the outside of the panel, and I've just gone ahead and marked things like where the flat sections are, where the bends are, again flat through the middle of the tank. Both the beads, I've got all three of them marked out, and then to get like the edge of the panel here, I've just gone ahead and taken the pencil and I just rub it along the edge, and that gives me the outline. And then I will take this template off, lay it down flat on the sheet, and I can just clean up the lines and things, make sure everything's straight. I've also gone ahead and marked like where the bend is. You can see there, that comes through, that ends over there. Same for the bottom of the tank. I'll take some masking tape and I'll just run it through just to make sure that these beads come out nice and straight when we follow the line. Alright, so we've got our first panel cut out at least. Now I'm going to go ahead and just see if I can bend it over my knee. And there we go. Minus a couple of beads, but mostly there. Alright, now that we've got our panel cut out and marked up, I'm going to go ahead and run the beads in the flat one and just practice trying to get a nice straight bead. Next up, what we're going to do now, we've got the beads in place, we're going to start tipping edges, start rounding them over so we can start welding panels together. So we're going to take an edge like that to looking a little bit more like that. Just using a rubber mallet and a dolly, we should be able to do it. Alright, now that I've got all the edges tipped over for the tank on both sides, I'm going to start looking into fitting this panel right here. And what I've done is just gone ahead and just put a little tape across just to stop it from springing back. I just measured both tanks, make sure they are the same. So what I need to do next is flatten out this little bit of the bead here, just the last 35 mils more or less, all four of those. And what I'm going to do is just put it on the wooden stump with a piece of leather on top, take a slapper and just smash it down, and then I'll go ahead and just maybe give them a little shrink to make sure everything's flat again, and then I'll start fitting it up and welding it in place. Alright, so now that we've got everything trimmed up and filed flat, we're going to start tacking it together and welding it all up. Alright, next up we've got the filler neck. That's going to get welded up. It's just made from a piece of flat sheet. And then we're going to cut out the hole, tip this edge on the outside here, and then weld in the filler neck. After that, we'll start tipping this edge here. We'll make up the 2 or 3 outer panels. Alright, next up we got to do the baffle. So if we do a little archaeology here, we can see the original baffle was actually riveted in place on one side, and on the other side it was welded in. And what he's done is he's just drilled a big hole for both these welds and then put the baffle on the inside and then welded the seam around from the outside, which is quite clever. But what I'll opt to do is just weld everything from the inside. That way we definitely won't have any leaks or anything like that. The rivets is just a very high chance of leaking, so I'll opt to just weld it on both sides. So I got a little bit of aluminium ready, so let's start making a baffle. Alright, so we've got the first bend made up with baffle. That's going to be the one that goes along this edge here. Next we've got to get this radius right for the inside, more or less. And to get that right, I'm just going to take a piece of welding wire and just lay it down in there, bend it more or less to the shape, and then trace it out. There we go, that's the easy part done. Next up, we got to figure out how we're gonna weld this all together inside here. Okay, so let's chat about the fuel pickup pipes inside the tank. So originally what the tank had is these fittings with a tapered thread. So the tighter you thread it, the more it'll seal. And then on the back of these fittings, he had soldered in the copper pipes. Now, the only issue I see with this is that if the threads do leak over time and you need to tighten the fitting more and more, you're going to end up twisting off the copper pipe. So I think a better solution would be something like these crush-on olives for the copper pipes. But that poses a new challenge. Now, I'd like to reuse these original fittings so that the fuel lines connect back to the same threads and nothing needs to be changed in the car. But that means that we need to crush on the olives either with this fitting or with some sort of adapter. Now, the problem is this is a tapered thread, so try and figure out where the thread's going to bottom out and when the olive is going to crush is a little bit difficult. Also, it's quite a fine thread, so to thread it into an aluminium fitting without stripping the threads to crush the olive poses a bit of a challenge. Something you could do is machine up something like this and essentially have it inside the tank. You can have the copper pipe come in, crush the fitting in place, and you're done. But if over time this starts to leak and you start sucking air into the fuel lines, to try and figure out where this is coming from inside the tank is going to be a huge mission. Access to it is also going to be minimal. So I need some way to have these olives be on the outside and the fuel line come through. So what I've come up with is this aluminium fitting just drilled out to 1/4 inch, so we can slide the pipe through, something like that, put the olive on, and then made up these brass fittings with a tapered thread so we can use these original fittings for the fuel line, and we've got a little bit coarser thread so we can actually crush the olive in place, and then it should be able to be sealed. And a little bit more serviceable than the original. If the olive ever does leak at some point in time, you can always crush it a little bit more or put some tape or some Loctite or something in there to help seal it up. At least you have access to it. Obviously the tapered thread, tighten it a little bit more, use some Teflon tape, something. A plan can be made. It's all, for the most part, accessible. Now that we've got a bit of a plan for our fuel pickup lines, next thing to look at is making a new one of these plates and welding it in place. And what I think that'll do is give me the ability to actually bend up the lines, make sure everything's exactly where it needs to be. I'll be able to run the lines, make clamps and just rivet them in place so that the lines are held in down there. And something else to look at as well is, obviously, if I put this plate here, you can see that where the sender goes lines up perfectly with the clearance cut into the center of the baffle here. So when I make up a adapter that we can weld on to this plate, well, not this plate, but its replica, we can just make sure that everything lines up there as well before welding in this plate and the opposite side. We can make sure that the articulation of the arm for the sender unit works nicely, clears, everything's good. So that's what we're going to get to next, making up the plate and welding it in place. Alright, so now that the tank is nearly finished, our last step is just to check that it actually seals off. There's no pinholes, there's no nothing. I've already gone over it once, and now we just need to make sure my work's good. But one thing I did have was these holes for the center unit, they were leaking. So I've taped up those threads. The two olives seem to be sealing for the pickup tube. and we've taped off the filler neck as well. I just put the silicone over there just to hold it in place. So to check that the tank's not leaking, we've just got a little soapy water. We're going to put some pressure in it, but because it's such like soft aluminium, we really don't want to put too much pressure in, so I'm just going to cover one hole, blow in there with my mouth, and then we'll see. Okay, so we've got a little pressure in there now. And leaks were up here. And it all seems to be good now.
So it should be bubbling up if there's any leaks in it.
Yeah, if there are any leaks, we will see it make little bubbles. We'll see if we can. Nope, that's all sealing. So if it leaks, it'll look like. That's what it should be doing.
The job is so well done, you can't even really show what it should be doing, yeah? Ah, beautiful.
Alright, so now we can just wash it down, make sure it's clean, and there we go. We've made a whole tank for a race car. What's the name of the race car? I was trying to figure it out. It's earlier in the video. I said you'd put a photo up of it. I'm sure you can chat to just to get a photo of it.
See if I can get a photograph of it.
Alright, so now that the tank's done, we can phone the customer, he can come and collect, and this was a fun little side project for the week, but let's get back to doing some proper metal shaping. We'll see you guys on the next one. Cheers!